From the moment Julie opened her mouth on that first episode of season 3, Real World Homecoming New Orleans, I just knew she was going to be a problem. And she continues to lower the bar. Fendi, like the bag. This is the I Refuse podcast. This is Mr. Fox, the I Refuse podcast. I'm back again. Earlier in the season on the YouTube side of the podcast, I did like an hour-long Real World Homecoming quasi-review of last season. But also I think I'd mentioned previous seasons from the first run of the Real World. And in that video, I talked about how influential New Orleans was for me. So lo and behold, that's the next season of Real World Homecoming on Paramount Plus. I gotta excuse me. So I watched the first episode last week. I know it was probably like a week or two behind. And I was just like, okay, this is gonna be some mess. First of all, it's good to see that for the most part, the entire cast hasn't aged too badly or worse. Kelly looks really good. I forgot that she was married to Scott Wolf from Party of Five in the movie Go. Love that movie. There's Melissa. Most improved, hasn't aged a bit. She looks really good with the longer hair. Has 2 kids. Most excited to see David, who now goes by the name Tokyo. And then there's Jonathan, who really didn't stick out for me during that first run of the Real World New Orleans. Danny, who stuck out for me the most during the first run of their season of the Real World. I don't know if it's Vermont. I don't know if it's like the stress of that comes with being gay, but he definitely aged a little bit. I'm not going to hold you. Not going to lie to you. David, who now goes by Tokyo, definitely is giving me hobo chic. But it was great to see them all back. And then there was Matt, who I thought he was, back then I thought he was a closeted guy. But he's actually a super, I wouldn't say super, but like very much into being a dad. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like an evangelist on the backside. But he's very parental. Very parental in Homecoming of New Orleans. So we go into the first episode, and I vaguely remember, outside of Danny and Melissa, Julie, and David getting into it for most of the season when they first came onto the Real World. I vaguely recall Julie, and she was annoying as hell when I first watched back in 2000. Very annoying, just kind of cringy. And it's going into this new season of Homecoming on Paramount Plus. I was like, yeah, out of everybody, she is the least improved. If anything, the 20-year absence or gap out of their lives, she hasn't really changed a whole lot. If anything, she's gotten worse. But it made me think, what's going on in the background, the first episode, things were going really well. But at some point, Danny and Melissa shared that, after, the season aired and everything, everybody on the show, the cast got a lot of appearances and opportunities in the media. I know, especially, I remember seeing David on the Chappelle show. A lot of us who remembers the Chappelle show closely associate David with that than we do with the real world. It's just a cultural thing. But another thing is that, Danny got a lot of press and attention, and I guess an extra level of responsibility being a gay person that is in a relationship with a closeted gay service member. I believe it was an Army Ranger at that point. But also, with them being college age, Melissa, Danny, and Julie got a lot of work going to colleges and opportunities to speak to college students about the real world and stuff like that. So, the crux of the issue that Melissa and Danny had with Julie that was explored in their first episode of season 3 of Homecoming is that Melissa and Danny both, their management or the two of them directly, got some pushback and some feedback through multiple parties during those college tour things that they were not good for the image. They were leaving an impression on college students that were inappropriate. And Melissa finds out that the source of these letters and this pushback is coming from Julie and her team. Melissa being a person of color and Danny being a gay person, and Julie being ultra religious, Bible Belt. And with that, you have those super religious that are like by the book, and with that, they kind of cherry pick and think life should be this particular way, and there's no room for any difference. Nuts. So Danny took it to heart, which was appropriate, because on top of, the presentation he had on the show and how much risk and how much danger it was being in a relationship with somebody that's a closeted service member and working with production to make sure his boyfriend's face is blurred out, and before, making sure the production knows, when it comes time to edit, blur his face out, making sure that any images of his boyfriend across the house is blurred out. Like, this is back during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And with that, there was definitely a huge presence by way of Westboro and some of the teachings of the 700 Club and some of the super mega church egomaniac religious types that were beating down on homosexuality. Just imagine you being a gay person going on these college tours, especially in like the South and especially in certain parts of New England, and you have, as part of the collective or that niche, you have a person like Julie who believes, man and woman only, marriage, childhood, that's the way of the Lord, that's the way of the God, that's the way it should be. And even after she went through a whole season with Danny and he's opened up to her, she's felt comfortable around him. Like, it's almost like she was faking it for her to turn around and like make sure he doesn't get anywhere outside of the show, because I don't believe they get paid while doing the Real World. So the most money they make is from the appearances at colleges and the media stuff. And for him, it was like we just we were just in the house for X amount of months or X amount of weeks to produce for the Real World. I've opened to you about coming out to my parents. I've opened up to you about my relationship with Paul. And for you to turn around after all that time, and I thought we were cool and we were friends, for you to do that, I felt some kind of way about that. He was more emotional about it. Melissa was more defiant about it. And keep in mind, both responses are appropriate. That for Melissa, it was people in your team, which ultimately you're responsible for. So therefore, you're solely responsible for it. Like she directly did it for Danny, but her team, still her team, did it for Melissa as well. And what's more important now than ever is that perception and narrative, especially when it comes to marginalized categories, Black and brown folks in the LGBTQ community. And Julie didn't get it. And I was like, okay, if this is how it is the first week or the first couple of days, there's really no way for her to like be or feel part of the cast. And she, Julie was ready to defend and clear her name by saying, I wasn't the one that wrote it. I remember writing the one about, towards Danny. I really honestly don't remember. It was just a whole lot. And for Melissa, that wasn't good enough. And I totally get it, where it was just like, you're ultimately responsible. The semantics don't matter. It happened. You're aware that it happened. And here we are in this house. Now, mind you, some of the cast has kept in touch in the 20 or so years since they first were in the Real World. Jonathan and Melissa have kept in touch so often, like every 4 years or so. Danny and Kelly have kept in touch. Tokyo's kind of been doing his own thing in Chicago with his YouTube channel. He's still doing the music thing, but it's not like you see him at poetry slams or you see him on, the festival circuit doing original music. He has a YouTube channel where he is cooking, but also doing musical vignettes, beatboxing, rapping, singing, in between, the clips of him cooking, which the way they spliced it into this season sends me out because I'm like, what's going on here? This is a lot. So going into season 3 of Real World Homecoming New Orleans, it's almost like they picked up right where they left off. Now, kudos to Tokyo for trying to open Julie's eyes, trying to make her more aware that, the defending it and the semantics and, you trying to remember doesn't matter at this point. They know which direction it came from. And with that, they lost a lot of opportunities while you continued. And it's not like during the initial run of the Real World New Orleans that Julie really was that girl. Like, Kelly was annoying, but Kelly had a job to do at that station, right? Melissa was a little spitfire that didn't take crap. Didn't understand it at first, but love it now. Danny was the sweetheart that you just wanted to cuddle with. David was a no-nonsense type of black guy, type A, that just rubbed everybody the wrong way. And Jonathan was like that party guy. Like the good guy, well-meaning, wasn't an asshole. Matt was the super virginal, interesting guy. Kind of faded in the background in the grand scheme of that show. But Julie just, there's so many issues that I take with the type of people, the type of person that Julie is. And I'm sure you guys out there have somebody in your friend circle or your associate circle that's just, and race and ethnicity doesn't really matter, although I think we both know that typically is one of these. From what I've seen the last 3 episodes, Julie is manipulative, passive aggressive, childish, very begins with a P. She lacks self-awareness and common sense, and I believe she suffers from main character syndrome, where it's like any interaction with another person, the light has to be on them. You have to take the attention, take the power away from somebody and make it about you. And it's frustrating and it's annoying as hell. And from the first episode of season 3, you can see she's working herself into a corner. And you really want to give people like that a chance, but just as soon as you think they get it, and just as soon as you think, oh, okay, he or she is apologizing, it's not the steps to get to a resolve or a comfortability with this person is longer. At some point in episode 1 bleeding over into episode 2, after the conversation with Tokyo, Julie does this thing which she always does in the episode 2 and 3 that I'm finding out. It's like she kind of tiptoes down the hall to the doorway and then backs up. She just lingers. Very creepy. She wants to talk to Melissa then. Melissa's not open to it. I wouldn't be either. At some point, they have the conversation, and Julie just can't say the words, which infuriates Melissa more. One thing about Melissa that I appreciate is that she's very clear and she's intentional about what she wants, what she needs, and how we can move forward without crossing boundaries that I've set from episode 1. So, at some point, Julie apologizes, but Melissa knows there's a difference between forgiving somebody and being friends with them. So she leaves the apology where it is and walks away. At some point in episode 2, one of the messages comes across the TV, and this particular message explores Paul and Danny's relationship on the show. So they'll show main footage and then they'll show unaired footage. But the gist of his storyline on the show when it was back in 2000 was around Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Since he was in a relationship with Paul, who was in the army during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Navigating through that was not easy for him. And you think once a person comes out that things just get easier, but it doesn't. Sure, you're free to a certain extent, but when you're in a relationship with somebody that is forced to be in the closet out of fear of death and harm and danger, just internally with like other service members. Because the thing about Don't Ask, Don't Tell is even if people speculate that you're that way, or that you're not straight in any capacity, it could definitely lead to murder. Look up the name Barry Winchell, which his murder happened around that same time. So imagine how it was for Danny. And by that point, by the time Danny was on the show, they had been together about 2 years. Because in total, Paul and Danny were together 8 years. So up until about 2006. So 4 or 5 years after the show had ended. But they explored that. After the clip ended, Danny did share that him and Paul were together until 2006. It was not amicable. It was rather messy. And what started that was Danny finding out that Paul was getting it in with a mutual friend of theirs. And, Danny shared that he felt immense pressure, being that couple that inspired and opened the door for a lot of other gay people watching who weren't sure whether or not to come out of fear, out of pushback. And to have that relationship play out on the show, which Real World was major back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah, they had several cycles of the Real World where they had gay and lesbian characters. This was the first where it was a gay person in an active, loving, supportive relationship with a person that was still in the closet. It showed another face, whereas like Pedro back in the early 90s was a gay person married to a black person who was also gay, also living with AIDS. And, there is a significant amount of responsibility and pressure that people in those situations or in that arena being on TV, that they have a particular image to uphold. It's interesting, but it's very much real. And with that, Danny felt that was really the only thing keeping him in the relationship, even though it had been bad for years. And he never got closure from that. So at some point during episode 3, he meets with Paul, and I'll get back to that. But episode 2 and episode 3 were part 1 and part 2 of essentially Julie acting like Julie. So in episode 2, they decide they want to go out to the clubs, go out to Cafe Du Monde's, the whole shebang. So they go to I think it's a drag bar, and over the course of the night, Julie starts to drink. And with that, Julie becomes all over the place. She gets a little aggressive. She starts, smacking things out of Tokyo's hands. She starts to push both of the guys away. She's like falling all over the place, running up to the stage, doing all this kind of stuff, being a sloppy, belligerent white drunk, right? So at some point during the night, it becomes obvious to just about everybody. Matt didn't go, and I don't believe Kelly. No, I think Kelly went. Matt was the only one that didn't go. It's obvious to Jonathan and Tokyo that we need to hone this in, because she's falling all over on people and knocking people over and being real belligerent. And at first they try to gently coax her and cajole her towards the exit, but she's falling back and pushing back and protesting and everything. That's level one. Level two, she's still just showing out. And, Jonathan and Tokyo are trying to think of ways to actually get her downstairs out this door. So at some point, Tokyo goes over to pick her up. It's like time to go. And they made it all the way outside, but the moment he let her go and the group got distracted, Julie runs back upstairs. Now at this point, security is made aware of this white girl that's just cutting up. So David and Jonathan go back in, make her aware that security really wants you to leave. Like, we really, really want you to leave. Like, this is no joke. And Julie throws like a kitty tantrum where they just like throw all their body weight on the floor. Like, you can't make me go. And it's like, no, bitch, like, security wants you to go. And by that point, the alcohol really took effect. And they're able to get her in the car, in the truck. And at some point, they make it to the house, and the door is open, and she face plants into the sidewalk. And then when they get her up, she runs into a tree. So, Matt hears the commotion outside, and he's like looking out the door and watching them like bring her in and try to lay her down and everything. And she's thrown up all over the place, like whole crackers. Not like fully digested, well-eaten crackers, but like, it's like a whole sleeve worth of crackers she ate that she didn't digest. Like, that all comes out on the floor. And Matt's like, that's why I don't go out. I just don't. And I hate this. But keep in mind for later, Tokyo is the one caring after Julie, making sure she throws up with the trash can, make sure she has a cold compress, make sure she's nice and comfortable. His girlfriend is gone, but she manages to throw up everything, and by the next day, she's downstairs on her yoga mat doing yoga. And Melissa and I believe it's Danny are in the kitchen, just amazed that she was able to not only recover, but go back to her routine like nothing happened the night before. So here's where classic Julie makes yet another appearance. At some point, Julie's upstairs and is in Kelly, Danny, and Melissa's room talking to Kelly. Melissa's on the far bed, going through her laptop. And Julie points out to Kelly that she has a bruise on her shoulder and pretty much says, this has to be from Tokyo grabbing me. Y'all know I don't like to be touched. Well, Melissa's antennas went up. And Melissa said in the confessional, she was like, are you really about to turn this narrative into, a black man grabbing you? Ma'am, you face planted into the sidewalk out of the SUV and you ran into a tree. Didn't think maybe that was where that was from. So this narrative kind of lingers for much of episode 3. I believe the last half of episode 2. Kelly's confused. The classic Julie is starting to really gain some traction at this point. And, at some point, word gets to Tokyo by way of Melissa that Julie is implying that you grabbed her in an inappropriate way. And Julie is on this victim tour. From the second floor of the house to the car ride to wherever the hell they were going. She was in one vehicle with Danny, Kelly, and Jonathan. Now, mind you, Jonathan was there, but at no point did any of them chime in to enlighten Julie as to what happened the night before. It's interesting that Julie kind of cherry picks, but also does a lot of double talking and contradicts herself. It's like you talk like you know enough to turn the narrative, but in the next breath you're like, I really don't know what happened. Well, of course you don't, because you were a slosh young lady to the point that you didn't have control over your limbs and your extremities, and you were being a belligerent drunk publicly in New Orleans. And I don't even recall it being Mardi Gras. So, girl, what are you doing? But the issue and the point is that now more than ever, people have to be, and this is anybody, but especially the whites have to be very careful with the narratives they put out that involve marginalized people. And yet again, Julie is putting herself in a position to where she is going to get checked, and she's going to be putting herself in a situation where she's uncomfortable, and she continues to play the victim card, or this is too much, and when it's too much, she flails out her arms, or she slams stuff and she runs off with, the crybaby face with no actual tears coming out. And at some point, a house meeting does get called, and Tokyo is actually the one that calls the house meeting, which was interesting to him because during their initial run back in 2000, house meetings were being called on Tokyo when he was, David, when, that was his name back then. But now here he is, Tokyo, calling the house meeting on Julie. Now, at this point, Tokyo tried to have a one-on-one with Julie about this narrative after Tokyo and Melissa had their conversation outside the house earlier in the episode. And again, Tokyo is trying to get Julie to get it, like, first of all, that's dangerous to twist it in that way, especially when A, you don't have full recollection of that evening, and B, you aren't aware. And C, that you're acting like it doesn't matter. So, of course, the conversation starts off, and Tokyo is in a much peaceful, mature, emotional headspace compared to what we got back in 2000. So, he starts off the conversation on the level, much like he started off the conversation with Julie in regards to what Melissa and Danny want from her as far as the letter controversy. And, Julie starts off kind of double talking, while almost she was trying to defend it, then she was trying to say she didn't remember, and, Tokyo's trying to give her the full context. And what's interesting, which I think some of you will find, is that people that are not about truth are not interested in context. Because then the next thing would be I would have to take full accountability. And Julie doesn't like doing that. So he's like, of course it gets a little tense because she's constantly pushing back on the reality that everybody saw. And she was like, well, no, but this, and you grab me, and when people touch me, I naturally do that, where I just put all my body weight on the ground because I don't want people touching me. And this and that and this and that. Like, more about her than the reality that everybody experiences because of her. Like, you gotta own all of it. And when it came off like she wasn't getting her way or she wasn't being heard, she slammed the little to-go box of salad on the table and stormed off with the crybaby face. I was like, okay. Least improved in the 20 or so years. So that kind of lingered on for a while. And by this point, Julie was doing more stuff to like alienate herself from the rest of the cast. But also justifying the night before. At some point, David calls the house meeting and it doesn't go too well. It was a hot mess. It was a hot ass buttery mess. And, Melissa drove the point even further to Julie that you need to understand and be aware of what it looks like when a white woman, you as a white woman, as a white person, puts this narrative out into the universe, into the house, into the other roommates, that a black man grabbed you in a way that was threatening to you. And when people say that, the point is recognizing the stereotypes that non-people of color associate with black people and brown people that is nowhere near the truth, but is more reminiscent and reflective of prejudices and biases that non-people of color have of black and brown people. And if you ask me, Julie knows exactly what she's doing and what she's saying. she's just maximizing the victimhood and the main character syndrome I had mentioned earlier to have this dance with the camera. But girl, we all saw it. And there's no amount of editing or no amount of splicing certain things together that'll have us believe that it didn't happen. Like, production works with what you give them. And you definitely were being pushing back and you were being belligerent. And yes, you actually did faceplant into the concrete. And you did run into a tree. And I can only imagine what else happened trying to get your ass in that house. And we all saw a reality that was different than the narrative you're trying to push out. And and if I vaguely remember, she did shit like this 20 some years ago, which is why I say she's least improved. And she really works up the hysterics and the performative for the camera. She was very performative with Danny the first episode over the letter. Like, talking real fast, and as soon as she walked in the house, she apologized to him. And it's like, we haven't even had a conversation first. We haven't even sat down long enough to make the seats warm. Like, are you doing this because you actually mean it and you recognize what you did? Or are you just doing this because everybody's around and you want them to know that? Which it doesn't always coincide with how they really feel. But nevertheless, like, that house meeting did not go too well. Melissa is holding Julie's feet to the fire. Everybody else outside of Melissa, Julie, and Tokyo are essentially staying out of it. Matt didn't go, like I said, so he's kind of like learning as this stuff comes out. And Kelly is over Julie at this point. And Danny is kind of like, girl, what are you doing? So at some point, it's still Julie is on the outside. One of the nights, I believe the night after, Julie was on the phone with her husband in the hot tub. Now, mind you, the hot tub is in the backyard, right under the window where Melissa, Kelly, and Danny sleep. So Julie's in the hot tub talking some stuff to her husband, and she's talking about the night before and how she doesn't like to be grabbed, and the black guy grabbed her, and she took one for the team, and she acted that way for television, and something about being a standout character or a main character or something. And Melissa and Kelly are listening to this whole thing, and they're like, this bitch is trying to create a TV show within a TV show. And she is really cutting up. It truly boggles my mind that after 20 years, Julie is still the same broad that was on New Orleans Real World back in 2000. And it's giving much borderline like a mental problem or something. Like, I just don't, or actress at this point. Like, now that I think about it, we're about 3 episodes in, and she is doing the absolute most, giving the camera a lot of performance and a lot of dramatics, either playing up the emotion, whether it's fear or aggression, or it's 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 something. It's something. It's like the part the part about reality TV is it's supposed to be real. Like we've all been watching reality TV for a while, and we can kind of figure out when shit's contrived and forced or rehearsed, and when shit's like fake or paid to be a certain way, or when things are natural. Like I've met some, not any of the real housewives, because some of them are so booked and busy. But I've met Peter Thomas once from Real Housewives of Atlanta. While he was on there, not like within the last couple of years, I met him in let's see, 2014, 2015, something like that. And Bar One was something. And he's just like he is on TV, he's like that in real life. So you know how you watch reality TV or you watch game shows or Survivor, and you're like, this shit's stage. No, some of these people are actually like this in real life, which was great to me. So Julie is doing the absolute most, and what's crazy about it is that it's right. It's right in the level, same wavelength from 20 years before. It's like she's exactly that same broad on Real World from 20 years ago. And she does the exact same, gives the exact same responses to stuff, does the exact same backbiting and passive aggressiveness and manipulation. And, when you get to be a certain age, that shit is exhausting. Like, it probably was cute back when you were in college, but we out here and we got mortgages, we got inflation, we got a whole Panasonic, we got Roe versus Wade about to be popping like crazy, like real world shit. And on top of that, 45 might be running again. But you can't convince me that for the past 20 years, you've been the exact same way. Like, unless you've been living in a bubble somewhere or living on another planet where it's just you and you have no interaction with the outside world or no wherewithal. Like, I was watching it, I was like, this is very creepy. This can't be healthy. Like, you're still acting like the early 20 something year old you were back on the show 20 some odd years ago. I'm loving Melissa. I'm loving Kelly. Like, I'm liking Danny still. It's probably early at this point to really expect Matt to have more of a presence. He looks exactly the same as he did 20 years ago. Like, still slender, still like conservative, but still has some style. He's just a dad on top of that. And every once in a while that would come out in the episode. Kelly still looks like she came off of like Sex and the City, and I mean that in a positive way. Like, she has the style and the flair and everything, but she's also still very much serious and intentional and more in control. And you can tell that her and Danny still have a strong friendship when you can tell Danny was starting to get overwhelmed reliving the life he had on the show while dating Paul. And she was just like, just breathe. And like, very supportive and very with Danny as he's going through some emotional stuff. I wonder what possessed him to move to Vermont, unless I missed it. Vermont is a vibe, everybody. I went back in 2018, but I'm not familiar with what part he's in. I mean, Vermont is wide and long, so he could be anywhere. Tokyo very much surprised me, but I think that comes with age. That impatient, gotta go, gotta do it now. That, you kind of come out of that as you age. I thought the nutcracker jacket that he had on was cute in the confessional, but when he was walking down the street and you got to see that it only comes to about right. All right, I'm gonna back up. But when you got to see him walking down the street and the jacket comes to about right here, and he has the book bag on, he's walking like this. It's like, hold on, bro. I'm gonna need you to return that to whatever Thomas the Train, Mr. Rogers, yard sale you got that from, because it is very much giving I Moonlight as a character at birthday parties. And, Tokyo has always had a style, right? And I think that his style, when he was on Real World New Orleans back 20 years ago, was a reflection of the style that it was back in the day. Like, we used to always see the wife beater with the skull cap or the do-rag with some jeans, and that was it. And that definitely was a hip-hop thing. But now he is doing the chef YouTube singing, rapping thing now. Not really quite sure with the nutcracker jacket, how that plays into the whole thing that he is now. But you can very much tell that motherhood and fatherhood has matured a lot of people. People are more chill, still very much conscious, and very passionate about human rights, civil rights, respectability, and boundaries. Now, Julie did say that she's married and everything. Don't recollect if she said she had kids, but wow, very draining, very exhausting. And that's just from the little bit we've seen so far on New Orleans Homecoming. I'm probably going to do these reviews 2 or 3 episodes at a time, do a video for 3 episodes at a time. And we shall see. I feel like things will probably get more bombastic as time goes along, and that Melissa and Julie will continue to bump heads, and Julie will continue to be exhausting in the house. Like, they've already asked her to swap, or they wanted to do different room assignments. And it looks like leading into episode 4, Julie is going to confront Tokyo again, because they initially were roommates. But towards the end of episode 3, Jonathan and Kelly suggested doing different room assignments, and Julie being able to put 2 and 2 together, that it's only her and Tokyo in the room together, and they're not giving her answers. She's going to go confront Tokyo yet again. So that'll be fun. Because also I kind of feel like Julie is, well, she's a provocateur. And that also is a common theme these days, is when people gaslight and poke and prod and provoke to get a particular response, so they can play the victim again. And I feel like that's going to be an ongoing dynamic between Julie, against Tokyo. And then Melissa's going to catch wind of it, and Melissa is going to come at Julie. Julie's going to put on a Sally Field type of performance in front of the group or in front of certain individuals. Jonathan's going to be exhausted. Matt's going to be in the background on FaceTime with his wife. Kelly's going to be in the kitchen cooking. Danny is going to be eating snacks, checking out at any inclination of an emotional breakdown. And that'll be the show. I'm just theorizing. So this is Mr. Fox Dad Reviews podcast. I'm going to keep watching Real World New Orleans Homecoming because, they had me wrapped around their finger back in the day. It was impactful and influential, so I know I will definitely be setting my page ablaze reviewing Real World New Orleans Homecoming. So follow and subscribe. I Refuse Podcast here on YouTube. We're also on 8 streaming platforms. Keep in mind the content may not be the same on both or across all the channels. We also have a Patreon. I haven't added much there since last year because y'all have been paying that dust. I'm not mad or anything, but, we have an email too. So, we take feedback on what you want to hear, what you want to see, what you want to listen to. It's a Pandora's box over here. So again, this is Mr. Fox, the I Refuse Podcast. Drink your water, stay blessed, and keep your eyes on your paper. Bye.